I'm from Proof of Play. We're a game studio and on-chain infrastructure provider. That basically means we build on-chain games and any of the tools that are required for the on-chain games. So everything that comes into it. Up there is a pirate. That's from our first game, Pirate Nation. I'll be talking a little bit about that today. We'll be learning about it. But first, a little intro about me. My name's Matt. I'm a multiple-time founder. I founded a company that scaled to 300 plus people. Before that, I've worked at some major game studios. The biggest one had games that released to billions of people. I worked on a game called League of Legends, another game called Valorant. So a lot of experience there in gaming. And this is Pirate Nation, which is our first on-chain game. Fully on-chain, which means that every single action in the game is using a smart contract. We have 50 plus smart contracts. And basically, it's been a bit of an adventure building it so far. So far, we're in closed alpha, well, semi-closed alpha, which basically means that you can buy a Founders Pirate right now on OpenSea or any other marketplace, and you'll get access to play the game, and you'll be able to build the game with us. And we released the game very early stage, and we've been very involved with building with our community to see the game evolve. This talk today is going to be talking mostly about speed and how we've kind of started the game and been optimizing for speed as we've been going on. But first, a little bit of a vision. This is from our CEO, Amit. He's the co-founder of Farmville, if you guys remember that game. And it's, we're really focused on building a great game. And that's actually a key differentiator for us. It's not really good enough for us to just build a great crypto game. In order to bring the future forward and to bring crypto games into the space, we need to kind of break through. And that leads us to speed. Speed is table stakes. I'm not sure how everyone else's connections have been here in Paris, but in my hotel, speed has not been a base feature. I have had a lot of trouble being able to connect to the internet, and that's led me to some PTSD of some early gaming moments being disconnected and losing a game. So we definitely feel pretty strongly about that. The story to date so far, firstly, does anyone remember this date? November 8th and 9th last year. This is in that 10-day period of when FTX was crashing. And I think on the 8th, this was our pre-mint. We got a little bit of hopium, and we found out that basically Binance was going to come in and save the day. So we felt pretty good about our mint the next day. And then the mint, within hours of minting, that was all kind of rugged from us, and everything kind of went haywire. Nonetheless, we ended up minting out in 5 or so minutes. And then a month later, we released the game, and we've been releasing features ever since. I think we've had 26, 27 releases. So in about 6 months, that's roughly once a week if you take out some holidays and vacation, things like that. A couple of months ago, we migrated to Arbitrum Nova, which has been absolutely amazing for us and given us a whole bunch of different, kind of improvements like speed and another one like cost. So obviously this is only looking at one slice here, but on the left here, you can see our previous network, the purple network, and on the right, you see Nova. And about midway through March, we changed over and we saw 20x reduction in gas, let alone the speed increase, which we'll get to in a moment. So it's been really good for us. It is important to note that you can see it go down further since then. And that's because we've been really focusing on improving our contracts, optimizing, making sure that we can get even more gas savings. So we're going to continue to do that. And the reason we do that is because we actually pay gas for every single transaction for a player. Because again, like speed, I think cost of being able to click something and go through is an important feature for gamers. So a quick summary of how we migrated to Nova. The first thing we did, which is super interesting, is we spoke to our community. And one of the key assumptions that we had going into this transition was that we thought that ownership was going to be extremely important. And we thought that people would essentially want to control their destiny as their assets got changed over. And one key thing we found out when we talked to the community, and they had seen us build, worked with us building, and essentially trusted us and said, hey, we trust you guys. We don't really care about the minutiae of transferring each token ourselves. We want you guys to just handle it. And so it's great news for us. We took that strategy and we essentially devised that and dropped a bunch of tokens on the new network. And so when it came to migration day, we had a pretty simple flow. we paused the game and locked all of the tokens. And then we airdropped all new tokens on L1, which a little tidbit, we did do some prep for this. We re-optimized our L1 contract, which would have cost about 150 grand to mint had we not, and took that price down to 15 grand, which was significant savings. And then we dropped everything on Nova, and it took a matter of hours. So within, at the start of the day, we were on Polygon, and at the end of the day, we were on Nova. Our players were able to play. There was no relics of the game back on the pre-ETH network, which was amazing. So that's a little bit about kind of the history of the gameplay. But diving into the details and like how we go underneath the engine, I'd like to talk a little bit about. So firstly, has anyone seen any of these kind of pop-ups when they're playing any on-chain games? I think if you played them last year, you would have seen these a lot. Obviously now games are starting to get around this. And as we were making our game, this was the first thing we noticed. We couldn't play the game without basically playing a pop-up simulator with MetaMask. And so before launching the game, the first thing we built was this signless and gasless gaming system. And so for what we do here is we essentially create a wallet for you. That's what we call a gameplay wallet. And that wallet has a very limited scope of actions that it can do. It sits inside your browser and it signs transactions for you without you having to approve them. Those transactions are always going to be in-game actions that are positive sum. So things like if you go on a quest, you're going to get resources. But anything that could be super destructive, it cannot access. So it's got a very limited scope, and this allows us to essentially have this seamless gameplay. And one fun fact about that is we've saved over 1 million authorizations, which I think is pretty cool. As part of that, we also built this custom forwarder. It's very similar to anyone that's familiar with meta transactions. We use the same model. We're based it on very similar concepts. And we have a happy flow on the top there, which is for players. If you're a player, you can sign your meta transaction. You can send it through to our relayer. We have a bunch of different relayers that we load balance for speed, and then it goes through the contract, plays the on-chain game. But one really cool thing about blockchain gaming that hasn't been super explored yet is this idea of a separate gameplay with bots. Traditionally, in traditional games, bots are kind of, swept under the rug, not talked about. At a game studio, there'll be a small team focused on any cheat or any bots, very not super well staffed, that is trying to kind of fight this battle in this arms race. But on blockchain, it's a little bit different. Every action is above the table. You can see everything that everyone's doing. So all players can be evangelized to help on this anti-cheat. And from a game design perspective, we have some pretty awesome tools now. Previously, we were only really able to use 2 tools. You can ban someone outright, or you can kind of block them off from time. And there's now a 3rd tool that we can use here, which is gas or money. You can start amping the gas if you see that people are not behaving like players. And obviously that has another consequence. So you have to be careful about how you use it. You don't want to have a game become pay to win, which, I am vehemently against. But it can be an important tool for your fight against the bots. So that's something we're kind of interested in exploring. Another thing we built in this journey, which we had to build for Nova, was a custom VRF. And so we're using a VRF that's off the shelf. And as we built the game, we learned that our use cases needed a little bit more than the one use case. And so currently we have rebuilt that using 2 partners, OpenZeppelin and DRAND. And it's been great so far. But I'll talk a little bit about where we're going with that a little bit later and why it's important that we needed to switch. The next thing we built, which I think has been the most popular thing so far, is this thing that we call mirroring. And the idea here is that we have our gameplay on Nova, but we have our main tokens in the game on L1 on Ethereum. And that's important because I think we want to make sure that the people in the game that are playing the trading game, the game type that is all about trading, all about like that kind of NFT collector persona, they want to have the most visibility for their items that they want to trade. And so previously we had a experience where you would buy a pirate, and then immediately when you came to the website, you would be hit up for some money to bridge it, which feels really bad. Almost like one of those mobile games where you kind of download it and all of a sudden you have to buy something, instant delete. But we really wanted to get rid of that flow, and especially, the pain involved with that to our product lead, Adam, who absolutely hated it. And so we built this tool called mirroring, which essentially from a technical perspective, on a high level, takes an L1, which you have complete ownership over, which you wouldn't have with a bridge at all times. And then there's an L2 token that is shadow token that mirrors the ownership of that. And so that's the basic premise of it. Obviously, there's some minutia underneath, which is essentially dealing with reorgs, times for finalization, and all of those are considered inside of the mirroring process. We've had a ton of interest on this. So if you're interested in talking to us about us, find us or talk to us later. We're always looking and trying to share some of our tech. Final thing that we've built and released so far is the concept of this ECS. For those of you who are kind of known in the autonomous worlds circles or have been following that, ECS stands for Entity Component System. It's a pretty old world pattern. It's used by Unity by default, for example. Unreal has plugins for it. It's a very common game design pattern. We're seeing the trend move forward towards that, and we quickly pivoted to start building our engine to make sure that we're compatible with other autonomous world engines like MUD, so that if you use an ECS, you can use ours as well. We're also building a ton of tooling around that. In the slide, it says web-based CMS, but we have this tools for our non-technical game designers to basically put content in the game. So things like quests, things like 3D models, everything that you want to deliver to the game gets uploaded to the various side of the blockchain. So for quests, they are stored on chain. For models, they are stored on our PFS. But we want to give tools that game designers are used to be able to use that. And eventually, we want to give that to the public, because one of the cool things about these autonomous worlds is you can mix and match worlds. So there could be someone that forked our game and made a space nation and runs that, which really think is cool. So now let's talk about what's coming next. We've talked a little bit about what we've done. And obviously the first thing here is we're going to be open sourcing our tech. This is something that we'll be kind of slowly putting out piece by piece, because we're putting a lot of effort into documentation and making sure it's ready for people to actually use it and understand what to build with it. So we're very excited about doing that. Obviously, you can look at our contracts right now. They're all verified, so you can see a quite large amount, but it's not well documented yet. The next thing we're going to be working on is this PvP protocol. And so it's a little bit of a graphic here, and there's a little bit of alpha. On the left is our existing combat system, and on the right is one we're in development on. And so first of all, I'll caveat and say, this may not be what we end up with in our combat. So if you're seeing this, expecting this to be in the game, we're doing tons of play testing on it. We're going to keep iterating on it until it feels great, but this may not be it. And so take it with a grain of salt, but the important thing to take here is the speed difference. On the left, we're waiting for transactions on Nova, which are really fast, but they're not real time. We're talking in the measures of seconds. And on the right, we're using a PvP protocol here to do things in the low milliseconds to be able to do verification, which is pretty crazy. And so how that works is a little bit like this. Firstly, the game is deterministic. And so that means that every move you make in the game is replayable. This is not so common in games, but not unusual. For example, League of Legends moved to a deterministic system so that we could essentially replay pro esports matches. If someone spilled a coffee on their keyboard in the middle of a pro match, we can pause the game and we can replay the game on the server up until the point before that and restart the game. So we can use the same pattern on blockchains. And so here in this model, we can essentially broadcast our moves to peers that are around us, and they can run the moves locally and verify that that move is the same, and then send it back to the first person to be stored on chain later. That means we can do some pretty crazy use cases. So what's called PvP protocol, first use case is definitely in combat, but there's a lot of use cases for this. An example that we have is we have an island building feature where you can place objects. And on that island building feature, we have collision detection. Currently on chain, we have a limit of gas, which obviously you could probably solve if you use a custom L2 that increase the gas limit, but we want to be extremely portable to any chain. And so for this, we can use this PvP protocol to broadcast the signing message for it. And the client can redo the validation on their end, and they can do pretty complex calculations. In this case, it would be collision detection. You can calculate, for example, let's say we wanted to calculate a palm tree if it hits into a giant skyscraper building. We can do that on the client pretty easily without any limits. So pretty cool applicability. And can even go further than that. We can do things like multiplayer. Have two pirates sitting next to an island, two different machines walking next to each other in real time, sharing the information. But what about RNG? This is typically something that blockchains had a pretty hard time with, and determinism has had a hard time with. Well, this is where that VRF system we were talking about earlier comes into play. DRAN has a pretty simple premise, which is, let's agree to a point in time in the future, and I'll give you a random number at that time. And so we can use that in this model, by putting that philosophy into practice. If I'm making a move, I can say I want to have a random number at this point in time, and the receivers of it can verify that they received the message before that number has been generated, and then they can essentially see the random number generated and then replay it and sign it. And so all of this is stuff that's super cool with determinism and some of the stuff we're working on now. So that's a little bit about what we're working on. And TLDR about us is super passionate about on-chain games. So have a lot of fun building them, a lot of fun playing them, and expect to hear a bit more of us coming from the future.